My name is Alex Zapata, and this is my project on returning native land to save native land. Cultural erasure, genocide, disease, and racism aren't the only things that have been brought to these lands by colonialism. One other issue remains apparent, and it is the degradation of the environment in the hands of colonial occupiers. The act of traveling from land to land brought invasive plants, pollution, and overall destruction of the land. This thereby ruins natural landscapes that can translate to new dangers to people in their communities, such as increased wildfires in locations like Southern California. Not only this, but the degradation of nature also prevents future generations from enjoying a connection to the natural landscape. All of these issues came as a direct result of colonizers removing native peoples from their land and preventing them from partaking in their traditional practices. Many indigenous cultures and religions are rooted in connections to the land and the responsibility of caring for it. When colonizers removed native nations from their lands and attempted to erase their cultures, the stewardship of the land stopped and the health dropped as well. It is because of this that the return of native land to native peoples, such as returning the area between Lancaster and Los Angeles to the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, is essential to the rejuvenation of natural landscapes and ecosystems for future generations to prevent further degradation and issues. The history of stewardship of the land runs deep within the roots of indigenous cultures. The cultures, religions, and beliefs of many indigenous nations carry a perspective that centers around caring for the land through stewardship of the flora and fauna. There is an understanding amongst these cultures that people are a part of the ecosystem just as much as any other creature, and that as people, we have a responsibility to care for the land and protect it. But this concept is being impeded on by the colonial mindset that is heavily human centered. This human centric way of thinking is the mechanism at which these natural landscapes are being torn down and disrespected. In the documentary, In the Light of Reverence, there are three examples of this disregard of the native peoples, resulting in destruction and disrespect of the land. Three nations and their struggle with colonial power is highlighted within the documentary, one of which being the Lakota with the Devil's Tower. The Devil's Tower is a sacred place for the Lakota people, often being paralleled to a church where many ceremonies and prayers take place, such as leaving prayer cloths or offerings. But the biggest issue faced with the Devil's Tower is the recreational use of it by rock climbers. Climbing and drilling holes into a church can be seen as disrespectful and destructive, hence the nation's issue with the rock climbers. But this cry for change is only met with indifference by the rock climbers and government officials, failing to see the significance of the protection of the landmark. The true viewpoint of human centrism and indigenous disrespect is shown when a comparison is made of the Devil's Tower with Mount Rushmore at 24 minutes to 24 minutes and 17 seconds of the documentary, where it is revealed that courts have agreed for continuing recreational use of the Devil's Tower, whereas it is completely illegal to climb Mount Rushmore. This allowance of destruction to a natural landmark such as Devil's Tower, compared to the heavy protection of man-made monuments with faces of colonizers, such as with Mount Rushmore, represents the human-centric attitude of colonial minds. The connection to the land doesn't just stop at religion, however. Many indigenous nations rely heavily on the land to provide food, water, shelter, and materials. This reliance on the land not only translates to a deep respect of the land through religion, but also produces genuine methods of stewardship of the land that helps maintain and rejuvenate fauna and flora. One of the most known and widely used methods to care for the land are prescribed/cultural burns. According to the article Quiet Fire by Paige Buono, published by the Nature Conservancy, the native nations within Northern California have used prescribed burns as a way to reduce fuel for future fires and encourage the growth of plants that rely on fire for their life cycles. This practice was used with great precision and care by tribes such as the Yurok, Hupa, and Karuk. But the introduction of colonialism has made complications in the stewardship process. Ironically enough, when colonizers witnessed these prescribed burns, they viewed it as damaging to the landscape and prevented these prescribed and cultural burns from occurring in an attempt to save the ecosystem. This, however, led to an increased number of fuel that built up and eventually gave way to extremely hot burning wildfires, and reduced biodiversity due to the exclusion of plants that rely on fires to grow from the ecosystem. This not only resulted in damage to the ecosystem, but also a negative connotation of fire within nature. However, there was soon a realization from colonial powers that prescribed burns had actually helped prevent future fires from occurring, which has led to the indigenous practice being used as a way to treat the land. A research report from Stanford University, written by Chris Field and Rebecca Miller, named Prescribed Burns for Improved Wildfire Management in California, points out how prescribed burns are effective ways to keep forests healthy and productive, showing how these indigenous practices actually contribute to the upkeep and biodiversity of ecosystems. People can benefit from these indigenous practices as well. One example being the Three Sisters methods of agriculture. According to a research article by Emily Marsh named The Three Sisters of Indigenous American Agriculture, published by the National Agricultural Library, the Three Sisters methods of agriculture practice involves planting corn, beans, and squash near each other. This practice is heavily rooted in Iroquois culture and science. The three plants help sustain each other, which contributes to healthy and plentiful harvests. This method is currently used as a way to improve small at-home gardens, but has historically been used as a way on a larger scale to efficiently feed a large population in a sustainable manner. Because of these positive impacts of the environment that indigenous practices have, there's been the creation of Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, or IPCAs. According to the subsection making a case for an IPCA from the research report Seal River Watershed, A Case for Conservation, IPCAs are characterized by having indigenous peoples being stewards of the land, being long-term commitments for conservation of the land, and the increased sovereignty and rights of indigenous peoples. IPCAs can help the environment by allowing indigenous peoples to use their cultural knowledge of the land to help care for it, thereby preventing issues that relate to the degradation of the natural landscape. IPCAs make a huge difference in the ecological health of a landscape, which is why there must be some sort of it introduced to the Southern California landscape of Los Angeles and its surrounding areas. The indigenous nation that currently resides in the land between northern Los Angeles and Lancaster is known as the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians Nation, or FTBMI Nation. According to their website, the nation is composed of 4 regional ethno-linguistic groups located within the Simi, San Fernando, Santa Clarita, and Antelope valleys, who were victim of the Spanish colonization. This led to them being taken essentially as slaves within the San Fernando mission and dubbed as Fernandeños. These native groups fell victim to the oppressive forces of colonialism that led to the ravaging and disrespect of their land. But now we are seeing the consequences of this, as Southern California is marked as a hotspot zone for devastating wildfires that cause destruction to both natural and man-made landscapes alike. The FTBMI recognizes this and has built efforts to continue their traditional stewardship of the land and perpetuation of their culture. The Tataviam Land Conservancy is an organization under the FTBMI Nation that has worked to return the Tataviam land back to the nation and restore restricted access to the land by indigenous peoples. This organization was formally established in 2018, despite being in the works of creation since 1797. According to the Tataviam Land Conservancy website, the efforts being made for the restoration and conservation of Tataviam land is expressed through 2 significant projects that the organization is currently working towards. For one, there is an implementation of a native plant nursery, which provides plants that are native for restoration projects and tribal use. These native plants will be raised using traditional Tataviam land practices. The eventual goal of this native plant nursery will be to cultivate medicinal and ceremonial plants for traditional use, address the rising temperatures of urban environments through creating cooler places with plants, and promoting their resilience against climate change by utilizing native plants. To promote their signage and to promote their stewardship and right to their land, they have created a second project that focuses on creating signage and a cultural arts corridor along the upper Los Angeles River and its tributaries. These signages and art pieces will promote the culture and story of the original people of the land. These attempts to reclaim their land are only one step in the right direction. There is a need to allow the FTBMI Nation to have increased control over conservation projects within their land, as their practices and the indigenous knowledge may be the key to preventing disasters and protecting lives and the land. This is why an IPCA for the greater Los Angeles County region is so important to promote and encourage. Overall, the history of indigenous cultures and practices is rooted in respect for the land. This respect for the land has led to effective and renewable stewardship methods that help maintain ecosystems and benefit agricultural practices. Because of these positive effects of indigenous practices, it is necessary to promote IPCAs in many regions for the conservation and protection of natural landscapes. One such area that can benefit from this is the creation of an IPCA for the FTBMI Nation within areas between Los Angeles and Lancaster. This attitude of IPCAs benefiting the environment is not just unique to Native nations of the Americas. Indigenous practices have been created by Native nations from all parts of the world. In order to help prevent another mass extinction event from happening, there needs to be a push to allow indigenous communities to control conservation methods to allow them to use their historical and cultural knowledge. Evidence of this can be seen around the world with a research article by Kristina Swiderska named Biological Heritage Territories, Key to Halting Biodiversity Loss, where she highlights the biodiversity conservation success of indigenous peoples from Peru, Panama, India, Kenya, and China. If this attitude is adopted, then we'd be taking another step towards saving the planet. This is why in order to save native land, we need to return native land.